also Eric Carter, who was at our department in special ed here at UW-Madison and who is now at Vanderbilt University. So that is my thank you. A little bit of project background. Eric and I, when we both started in 2004, and our interest was in the area of transition, and that's really what this project focuses on. It focuses on the transition from high school to adulthood. And we're going to go over some of the project findings, and then also I'll leave time for comments and questions. And I'd like for the presentation really to take the frame of how can we work together. This was a really good experience for us, and I think for a lot of Wisconsin teachers and Wisconsin children, it was a really positive experience. The project also evidenced or resulted in some real-world products that teachers can use in their classrooms, and I'm going to show you what some of those look like. So the name of the project was Project Summer, and we did focus on summer as an opportunity for employment for kids with disabilities. And we were looking, again, specifically at some populations. It was funded also by the federal government, and Wasteman, it was the place that the project was housed. Our purpose was to improve employment outcomes for youth with significant intellectual and developmental disabilities and emotional and behavioral disabilities. So we selected these two groups, which aren't often put together, these two disability categories, in part because those were our own interests. And also, more importantly, because they have the poorest outcomes of any youth receiving special education. Kids with significant disabilities and kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities, particularly severe emotional and behavioral disabilities. When you're talking about things like going to work or college, and I see a lot of people nodding, so everybody's well familiar with those outcome issues. Everything that I talk about today is accessible on projectsummer.info, and that includes all of the research papers that have come from this project. And it also includes all of the products that we used with schools. So there are things like planning forms or resource maps for specific areas. And those are all available at the website. The website is no longer maintained in terms of, we don't add new stuff because the project has been over now for a couple of years. But you know, sometimes it takes a long time to get these things into publication. So you will see that the publications are very up to date. So we started with what is transition? What does the law require? And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but just to go over it, transition is a coordinated set of activities. This is according to IDEA 2004. A coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed to be within a results-oriented process, focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child with a disability to facilitate that child's movement from school to post-school activities. And really the changes in 2004 now seem old, but that focus really was on a results-oriented process and also on improving both the academic and the functional achievement. And I think for kids with severe and intellectual and developmental disabilities, academic achievement had sort of been considered for other kids with high incidence disabilities like learning disabilities. So this put a little bit of new pressure on special educators. Post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, all of those things that we can imagine falling under the umbrella of work and further education are included in this mandate. So the first thing that we wanted to do was we wondered what is the employment status of kids with disabilities. And so we started to look at this study, the National Longitudinal Transition Study. And that's a national study. It's a study that I'm working on right now as secondary analysis for kids who are learning English, for kids from high poverty backgrounds, etc. But it includes all kids with disabilities. And so all of that data is also available to you from the U.S. government, and the website is nlts.2 or nlts2.org. So you can check out that work there and any reports that they've generated. But basically you see that kids with learning disabilities are the most likely to have post-school employment. And that's also true for kids with other health impairment. And you probably are aware that a lot of the kids in the OHI category are kids with ADHD or other high incidence disabilities, speech language, etc. But what we started to notice is, okay, multiple disabilities, intellectual disabilities, looking at these outcomes, none of them are fantastic. At the highest, we look at a 72% post-school employment rate. But particularly when you get into the more significant or severe disabilities, you're looking at less employment. And you know, it's interesting because kids with emotional disturbance, or that's the federal term, EBD, is, you know, they're employed at a 64% rate. And if you look at them at different points in time, they're actually employed for higher percentages, but they tend to get fired and they tend to quit their jobs for some reasons that oftentimes do have to do with their disabilities.
Excuse me, but what that data means what? 1 year out? I mean, where's that data point?
It's a longitudinal study, and that particular data was taken for up to 4 years out. So some of the participants were 1 year, some were 2, some were 3, some were 4. But they do have, if you look at their reports very carefully, you can look at over time how kids are doing. And that also, you know, we have to take into consideration, some kids are in college too, so they might not be working for that reason. Okay, so this is our youth working in summer. Again, from the National Longitudinal Study at the national level. You can see learning disabilities, emotional disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and significant disabilities, and it's just like a stair step. So fewer and fewer students are employed over the summer, and it's one of the few indicators of summer at all, which was a surprising thing for us because summer is a normative time for kids to get jobs. And so we would hope that we're keeping tabs on kids with disabilities as to whether or not they're working, but we found this is really, there were like 2 indicators total ever of whether or not kids with disabilities are working during the summer. Youth without disabilities, as I mentioned, it's a normative time to get jobs, so there they are. So we had, excuse me, I kind of skipped over that. That was the comparison between youth without disabilities and youth with disabilities. So we can see, especially for kids with significant disabilities, summer seems to be a lost opportunity. And that's really what this project was designed to try to hone in on. So the project was multi-phased. It was a 3-year project, and in the first phase, we really needed to know to what extent youth with disabilities were involved with work or other community experiences during the summer months. So we didn't just want to count paid employment. We also wanted to count things like internships or volunteering or other things that would provide vocational experience in addition to paid work experience. And then what factors influenced youth's participation in these activities. And we had a pretty good idea from the national literature that things like self-determination were really important. So the first part of this, phase 1, we looked at 400 youth with disabilities in the following categories: learning disabilities, emotional and behavioral disabilities, and intellectual disabilities, specifically severe. And we looked at that over 34 high schools across Wisconsin. 27% of those were in rural areas, 35% in suburban areas, and 38% were in urban areas. And we did a lot of spring assessments. So we did things like a transition planning inventory with the students. We did things like a self-determination inventory with the students, or assessment with the students. And we have, on the website that I mentioned, published a lot of data of an assessment nature, sort of where are kids. And some of the findings that we have, which I'm actually not going to go into detail about right now, but some of them are not surprising in that, you know, teachers tended to view the self-determination of students a little bit differently than parents, and they viewed that a little bit differently than students. But suffice to say that self-determination in particular did turn out to be an important place that we could influence growth. Also, one of the things that we asked was, did students work during the summer? And so we tried to capture what the statewide picture was and then move on from there. At the same time that we were assessing students, we were looking in the literature, well, what works? What helps kids get jobs? And how can we bring that to this local setting? And that really constituted phase 2 of the project. And that's what I'm really going to talk about the most today. Phase 2 was what are the key barriers and facilitators of youth engagement, and what are the recommendations that stakeholders have for improving summer opportunities. So to do this, you know, in addition to all of the quantitative data, we also collected a lot of qualitative data. We interviewed teachers, we interviewed parents and youth, we also interviewed employers. And I think that's one of the things that makes our project a little bit unique, is that from the beginning, we really tried to incorporate local employers into the discussion. And one of the things that we learned early on, which was not surprising, but a place that we could leverage lots of influence was that a lot of employers aren't aware of disability-related issues when it comes to youth and employment. They might be aware of things like ADA or what they need to do for an adult who has a back injury, who is already under their employment. But to think about, oh, how do I work with a youth who has been diagnosed with emotional and behavioral disability was really a different framework for a lot of the employers. And so we focused a good amount of energy on that. We also did something called community conversations, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. And we had also in place, in part of the intervention, something called a community connector, which I'll also elaborate in just a moment. That was phase 2. So phase 1, find out where everybody is. Phase 2, ask everybody what they think about what will work. And then in phase 3, we tried to determine the effectiveness and feasibility of a multi-component intervention package aimed at connecting youth to summer experiences. So we're going to take all that information, try to intervene, design an intervention, put it in place, and then see if it works. And this was a development project. The phase 3 involved 7 high schools, much smaller. We had 67 youth with severe disabilities and 57 youth with EBD. And the intervention package included community-wide conversations, transition resource mapping, summer-focused planning, community connectors, and employer liaisons. Now, all of these 5 things came from looking at what works in the literature, looking at what the students, where they were, what they needed, and then also talking to all of the stakeholder groups that I mentioned before, and then trying to design something that would come, that would come together and really influence employment and increase the opportunity for youth to work in the summer. Now, not all youth want to work in the summer, and that's fine. Sometimes youth do things like go to summer school or take classes at community colleges or volunteer, etc. But our goal was to make sure that they were, if not working for pay, also it had the opportunity to engage in some of these other experiences that would help promote their vocational skills and get them basically connected and involved. So the first thing that we did was something called community conversations. And in our community conversations, the idea behind the community conversations was to invite everyone. And we did not invent this wheel. This is based on the World Cafe model, and you may have heard of that. It's free. It's on the web at worldcafe.com. And the World Cafe model basically says the more people you involve, the more social networking you create, the strengthening you do for people to be involved with each other and hear about jobs and find out about opportunities and get involved. We also wanted to do this project in a realistic way, so we tried not to spend very much money. So we did something like chose an Evite. You can see this is from the Heartland area community conversation. But we made Evites, which are free, made an Evite account, and just invited as many people as we could. And we asked people to invite other people. And the notion was, and we also hung up flyers, and we had, we served dessert. That was our one big expense. And in a lot of cases, we were able to contact the schools and have the vocational prep class, if they had one, who was involved in food service, to make desserts, to bring them. So we really tried to strengthen the ties between us, the community, etc. And at the end of the day, who came to these? So these are 7 conversations because we were in 7 different places. About 20% of the attendees were school staff. Employers accounted for 15%, and we were really excited about that. I mean, all we did was hang up flyers and say, please come talk to us and everyone about this issue. And to get 15% by sort of cold calling was, it was inspiring for us. About 20% were from human services like Voc Rehab, other disability service agencies, 25% family, 4% youth, and 15% that either didn't identify or were difficult to categorize in these other groups. And what we asked them to do in these conversations is to really consider 2 questions. What can we do as a community to open up summer employment opportunities for youth with disabilities? And what would, and this would be the participant looking at this, what would I be willing to do? Now, if you go to World Cafe, there's a whole way to implement this, and you sit around tables and you talk, and you switch tables so that you're starting to mushroom information and connections. But you can see the questions are simple. They're just asking, what can we get out of this? At the very end, here's a picture of one of our Social Security rep, that was also inspiring to have people there who knew. You know, a mythology for people with severe disabilities is that if they get a job, they'll lose Social Security benefits. So it was great to have someone there who could talk about when is that a reality and when is that not. And then at the end of the night, what we did was something called, again, not our invention, World Cafe. We did something called harvesting ideas. And so we got everybody back together in the big group. I mean, teachers just think, yeah, okay, we do this all the time, right? We had Post-it notes, we wrote notes, we said, what do you do, what's the problem? Every community said transportation is a problem. Getting kids to work is hard to do in the summertime. Okay, so then how can we fix that problem? And we would just list out all of the ideas that came. After we harvested those ideas, we then put them together in a type of report. And that's really where the legwork from the project came in. But it is a place that we think communities could easily accept with very little cost, still low cost. We gathered those ideas and we gathered the solutions. We put it in the form of a report, and then we put the report up on the website, and then we also emailed the report to all of the attendees. So again, the notion behind community conversations was pretty simple, just sharing information at a very basic level, and also the idea of group